The orphan in lipstick. The childhood Marilyn Monroe never showed you. When you think of Marilyn Monroe, you probably picture fluttering dresses, red lipstick, and a shoulder that's always about to slip out of a silk strap. At the very least, an air kiss in front of an American flag. But few know that beneath the powder, curls, and megawatt smile hid a girl named Norma Jean, whose life before the action looked more like a black-and-white social drama than a fairy tale. Hollywood. The land of dreams and schizophrenia. Norma was born in Hollywood in 1926, yes, in the very heart of the future industry that would turn her into a sex symbol for export. But she wasn't born in a villa with a pool. She arrived in a world where the nearest prospects were a new foster family, not an Oscar. Her mother, Gladys Baker, suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. In simple terms, sometimes she hugged Norma, sometimes she hid from her own thoughts in a closet, and eventually she ended up in a psychiatric hospital. As for Dad, well, he was so mysterious he didn't even appear on her birth certificate. More myth than man, foster homes and friendly strangers. While other children dreamed of ponies, birthday clowns, and candy, little Norma Jean got something else. Foster homes, orphanages, and strangers she was supposed to call Mom. By the age of 7, she'd already changed more guardians than a Tinder user goes through matches, the most heartbreaking detail. At 9, Norma landed in a Los Angeles orphanage, right in Hollywood. And paradoxically, that's where her performance began. Not on stage, but in life. Norma quickly realized, to survive, you had to be liked. And from then on, she played. No script, but full commitment, the room she never spoke about. Let's not sugarcoat things by calling it a rough childhood. In her early teens, Norma was sexually abused by one of her foster guardians. This was a time when no one talked about such things, and therapists were considered somewhere between mystics and snake oil salesmen. She learned early. Men want you when you smile, even if inside you're crumbling. That one twisted lesson would become her lifelong burden. Married at 16, just to avoid the orphanage. By the age of 16, Norma had a choice. Go back to the orphanage or get married. She chose marriage. James Dougherty, a working-class guy with the romantic appeal of a brick, became her official lifeline. Unsurprisingly, their union had zero fairy tale vibes, but at least it wasn't another foster home, from hand-me-downs to pin-up posters. It's quite something, isn't it? The girl no one really wanted would become the woman everyone desired. The girl afraid of being alone learned to seduce entire rooms with a glance. Later, Monroe would say, "I belonged to the world because I never belonged to anyone as a child." And that may be the most honest line in her entire biography. Therapists, lights, and the deep hollow within. As an adult, Marilyn had it all. Psychoanalysts, pills, parties, presidents, admirers, everything except stability. That same gaping hole from childhood never left her. Only now, instead of an empty bed, there was a film set. Instead of silence, the hum of cameras. She didn't forget her childhood. She memorized it and reenacted it. Every whisper, every flinch, every glance. The real irony, the most glamorous woman in Hollywood was raised in places without even a mirror, a girl with no father, a mentally ill mother, and a revolving door of strangers. And yet there she is, smiling from a poster, winking at you, and you've already forgotten her name was Norma. Maybe she was trying to forget it too. And hi, how brunette Norma became Platinum Marilyn, the hair color that changed the world. So you're sitting there, sipping your coffee, thinking Marilyn Monroe was born a walking perfume ad, platinum curls, lips the color of strawberry sorbet, and a voice like she just slipped out of a champagne bath. Think again. Marilyn was not born a blonde, and actually, she wasn't even born Marilyn. At the starting line, she was Norma Jean Mortensen, a girl with plain old brown hair, the kind of hair that says, "Please cast me," rather than "Make me a legend." no shine, no mystique, just a brunette with hopeful eyes and a face that screamed, "I promise I can sparkle." Her first steps into modeling weren't exactly dreamlike. At Blue Book Modeling Agency, they delicately dropped the bomb. "Look, Norm, here's the deal. Blondes sell brunettes. Read books." So, like any ambitious young woman trying to make it in Hollywood, Norma made a beeline for the nearest beauty salon, and thus began her golden transformation. Not metaphorical gold, literal shades of it, the early dyes, not great. Sometimes she looked like a half-baked cupcake, other times like a character from a low-budget anime. But she didn't give up. Norma tested 12 shades of blonde before she landed on the one. Platinum, the exact hue of the American dream and camera flashes. That's when the metamorphosis began. The foster home brunette was becoming the woman who could halt traffic with an eyelash flick, new hair, new makeup, new name, and poof, Marilyn Monroe was born. But this wasn't just a makeover. This was a surgical identity swap via peroxide and ambition. The hair didn't just make her noticeable, it became both her armor and her entry ticket into 20th Century Fox. Platinum Marilyn got roles, quotes, scandals, and presidents. Brunette Norma, she quietly watched it all from the inside. Marilyn became blonde by strategy, but fell in love with the persona for real. Because in a world where brunettes wait in casting lines for years, Marilyn the blonde just walked in, and the cameras rolled. Of course, platinum comes at a price. It wasn't just a hair color, it was a role, one that soon became inescapable. Everyone expected the sweet, dumb blonde with the IQ of a slipper but the gaze of a snake. And the blonder her hair got, the harder it was to prove there was an actual person underneath. So yes, one bottle of hair dye sent Norma Jean straight into history. And you still think changing your look won't change your life? How Norma Jean became Marilyn Monroe. And yes, a man was involved, of course. Legend has it, to become a star, you need talent, charisma, and the right name. Because, let's be honest, and the Oscar for Best Actress goes to Norma Jean Mortensen. Sounds more like the winner of a peach pie contest in Oklahoma than a global sex icon of the 20th century. So no, Marilyn Monroe wasn't born Marilyn Monroe. Her name was given to her out of love. But not the romantic kind, the classic Hollywood kind, where a man in a suit with an ice cube in his glass decides what you'll be called for the next 100 years. His name was Ben Lyon, and he was a casting director at 20th Century Fox. When he looked at the already blonded but still modest Norma, he suddenly said, she kind of reminds me of this one actress I used to know. Her name was Marilyn. Let's go with that." That's it. No symbolism, no deep meaning, just a random association. Like if he'd said, "She reminds me of my dog. Let's call her Betty." As for the last name, that took slightly more thought. Norma actually brought some creativity to the table. Well, my grandmother on my mother's side was named Monroe. Why not? And just like that, through one office chat and without a single astrologer present, Marilyn Monroe was born. A blonde who would become the dream of millions and the migraine of studio execs. Now let's be clear, this wasn't just a stage name. This was a century-defining brand. Call her Norma, and the audience yawns. Call her Marilyn, and men start standing up even with a broken spine. The name gave her magic. Because Marilyn Monroe wasn't a person. It was a spell, one that turned Norma into an icon. Oh, the irony. A man gave her the name. Men decided how she should look, what she should say, when she should stay quiet, all to sell more tickets. But it was under that same name that she'd one day flip the industry on its head, boycott the studio, and force the suits to rewrite their contracts. Pretty bold for a woman who basically got her name at the front desk. So, dear girls, if you ever feel like your image just isn't working, maybe it's not the lipstick, maybe it's the name. Maybe it's time to rebrand, or find your own Ben Lyon who looks at you and says, You're not a Svetlana, you're Bagheera. And boom, your career takes off. And Norma? She stayed in the same head. She just got renamed Marilyn, and no one ever asked if she wanted to switch back. The father who wasn't there, how Marilyn Monroe spent her life looking for Dad. And DNA found him 60 years later. If you think Marilyn Monroe's story is some polished Hollywood fairy tale where everything is dramatic but fabulous, buckle up. Here's a plot twist straight out of a daytime talk show. She never knew who her father was. At all. Ever. No, he left to get milk. No, he died heroically. Just a blank space in the life of one of the world's most famous women. On her birth certificate, it says Martin Mortensen, technically her mother's husband. But here's the thing. Norma Jean's mum, she hadn't become Marilyn just yet, left Martin before she even realized she was pregnant. So legally the father, but functionally, just a name on a line. Weak alibi. Her mother, by the way, was not exactly a source of clarity. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, she ping-ponged between psych wards and reality like a faulty radio, so she wasn't exactly the person you'd go to for a clear family tree. But one day, she casually dropped this. You know, honey, I think your father was Charles Stanley Gifford. Charles who? Some guy at the studio. We, had a little thing. Does he know? Well, probably not. Gifford worked at Consolidated Studios, and by all accounts was the kind of guy who specialized in short-term flings and long-term silence. No calls, no letters, no surprise visits with teddy bears, just the classic Hollywood ghost, in human form. Marilyn didn't just not know her father. She longed for him, desperately. Her mother once showed her a photo of Gifford, and little Norma Jean turned it into a sacred relic. She fantasized that one day he'd show up at her door and say, "Sweetheart, I was wrong." And she'd whisper, "It's okay, Daddy, let's go get ice cream." Spoiler alert, he never knocked, not once. And then, in 2022, 60 years after Marilyn's death, the world finally got an answer. A group of French documentary filmmakers decided to test the theory about Gifford using modern science. They got their hands on a lock of Marilyn's hair, purchased at auction, because of course, and tested it against the saliva of one of Gifford's great-grandchildren. The result? 100% match. And just like that, after decades of emotional cliffhangers, psychological wounds, and a lifelong hunger for fatherly love, it turned out her mum was actually right all along. That elusive Gifford was indeed her biological father. But here's the kicker. Did it even matter anymore? Did it fill that frozen void inside? Probably not, because Marilyn didn't need a name. She needed a person, a voice, a hand, a defender. And Gifford stayed a myth, even in the documentary, just a DNA match with no soul. So yes, now we know who her father was, but she never did. Her first friend had fur and a tail, then he got shot. Welcome to Marilyn Monroe's childhood. Every icon has an origin story. Marilyn Monroe's just happens to start with something furry, four-legged, and heartbreakingly doomed. No, this isn't a metaphor. Her very first real friend was a dog. The only creature in her early life that didn't try to send her back to an orphanage, didn't demand she smile, and didn't touch her without asking. His name was Tippy, a scruffy mutt, and like all classic pairings, abandoned girl and stray dog, they clicked instantly. No you should, no sit up straight, just a wet nose and a wagging tail that greeted her like she was the best part of his day. And maybe she was. Tippy became little Norma Jean's one constant in a life where grown-ups were always spiraling, institutions had revolving doors, and the concept of home was basically a joke. While adults lost their minds, debated custody, and played musical chairs with foster homes, the dog just sat by her side. He didn't try to fix her, didn't scold her for being too emotional, and didn't ask her to toughen up. He simply existed, and for a child like Norma, that was everything. But of course, Hollywood loves to break your heart before the opening credits. One day, a neighbor shot Tippy, because apparently the dog barked too loudly. Yes, really, imagine the level of inner peace you must lack to murder a dog over noise. Welcome to the first episode of This is Marilyn's Life, rated 18+ for cruelty, and we're still in Season 1. Norma cried for days, and no matter how many smiles she would later serve up to the camera, that story never left her. Because let's be honest, if your first and only friend gets gunned down in cold blood, trusting people afterwards isn't exactly easy. That one moment explains a lot. Why Marilyn craved people who wouldn't leave. Why she reached for men who promised safety, only to disappear. Why she feared being alone, but feared being attached even more. Because when the first thing you love gets killed, you learn to love cautiously or not at all. Biographers usually gloss over it, just a sad footnote in the early chapters. But the truth is, Tippy wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of what she'd chase for the rest of her life. Unconditional love. And maybe when things were falling apart later, the pills, the cameras, the breakdowns, she didn't think about the red carpets, or the White House, or even JFK. Maybe she just remembered running through the yard with Tippy, him dropping a stick at her feet, and her laughing like the world hadn't happened yet. So if you think dogs are cute but not really important, take another look at Marilyn's story. Sometimes the ones who bark and wag their tails save us more than Hollywood ever could. The dumb blonde who read Plato. Inside, Marilyn Monroe's embarrassingly smart book collection. Let's be honest, when you hear the name Marilyn Monroe, what do you picture? A dress flying over a subway grate, lips like strawberry lollipops, and a voice that sounds like she just woke up on silk sheets in the arms of a billionaire. You probably don't think, this woman could totally discuss metaphors in Joyce's Ulysses. But surprise, darling, Marilyn had a personal library of over 400 books. 400. And no, we're not talking about chick-lit, how to keep your millionaire manuals, or bacon in lingerie cookbooks. We're talking intellectual artillery. Freud, Plato, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Shakespeare, and yes, James Joyce's Ulysses, that one book even literature professors don't finish, and she carried it around in her car. Photographer Eve Arnold recalled a moment during a shoot when she casually asked Marilyn what she was reading. Without missing a beat, Monroe pulled Ulysses out of her bag, right there between her lipstick and compact mirror. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't for show, just another casual evening with James Joyce. You know, the usual. Sure, there were skeptics. People scoffed, saying, that's just PR, or those books were planted for the photo, or she could barely read. Well, guess what? Marilyn didn't just read, she wrote, she penned poems, she kept journals, and she could quote poets that most studio execs probably thought were shoe brands. So why did she cling to books so fiercely? Maybe because, unlike most men in her life, books didn't abandon her. They didn't promise love and vanish. They didn't reduce her to a pretty face. A book didn't ogle her chest. It just opened, and that was enough. For Marilyn, learning became a rebellion, a way to prove she was more than a decorative hourglass with legs. She even enrolled in evening literature classes at UCLA. While other starlets were booking Botox and chasing producers, Marilyn was diving into Aristotle and scribbling in notebooks. I want to understand how the world works. I need to know what it all means. So next time someone says she was just a sexy shell, show them that photo of Marilyn wrapped in a sweater, curled up in a chair, eyes sunken with thought, reading Thomas Mann. Because the real bombshell wasn't just in her curves, it was in the fact that she had a brain, and a bookshelf to prove it. I belonged to the world because I never belonged to anyone. Marilyn Monroe's quotes weren't about glamour, they were about survival. You know those aesthetic Instagram quotes, all soft pink clouds and oat milk lattes? I'm very definitely a woman and I enjoy it. captioned under a filtered mirror selfie with perfect lighting. Feels empowering, right? Well, hate to break it to you, but a lot of Marilyn Monroe's quotes weren't cute affirmations. They were screams in lipstick. Behind the whole "I smile because I'm blonde" image was a woman who survived foster homes, abuse, betrayals, psychiatric hospitals, all while wearing fabulous heels. These weren't Pinterest captions. These were entries in her diary when she couldn't sleep from loneliness. One of her most brutal and honest quotes was, "I belonged to the world because I never belonged to anyone." Translation: everyone loves me now because no one ever really did. That's not a poetic metaphor. That's an autopsy of her childhood. And yet, she was constantly plastered on magazine covers. Hollywood adored her look, but America fell in love with someone they never actually knew. So many of her inspirational lines read like motivational posters until you remember the context. Like, "I don't stop when I'm tired, I only stop when I'm done." Sounds fierce, right? But now imagine saying that while popping pills, attending therapy 4 times a week, and battling chronic insomnia. Suddenly, it's not ambition, it's survival mode in high heels. Or how about this classic, "A smart girl leaves before she is left"? That's not sass, that's trauma. Marilyn always left first, left her marriages, left sets, left parties, because someone important had once left her when she needed them the most, and she decided she'd never let anyone beat her to the door again. Today, people post these lines beneath bikini shots and thirst traps. But the original context of these quotes, desperation, a woman trying to say, "I'm more than what you see, I'm here, I hurt." If social media had existed then, she wouldn't be writing captions, she'd be sending cryptic midnight tweets and deleting them at 2 a.m. People love to quote Marilyn like she's a flirt goddess. But what she really wanted was to be understood, not printed on teenage t-shirts in mall shops. If you actually read her words, you realize they weren't about loving life. They were about surviving it, and doing it as gracefully as possible. So next time you feel tempted to slap another "I'm not dumb, I just look like this" quote under a pouty selfie, maybe pause. Go back. Read her real words, without filters, without flowers, without glitter. And yeah, it might ruin the mood a bit, but at least you'll finally see the real Marilyn. 35 meters of magic. How Marilyn Monroe's walkout did. Every superhero in cinema, superheroes jump off rooftops, flip mid-air, fly through fire, punch through walls, and throw cars. All for that one unforgettable action shot. And then there's Marilyn Monroe, who just walked 35 meters. No stunts, no slow motion, no body double, and it became the longest walk scene in film history, shot in a single take. Simply because no one dared yell, "Cut!" They were too hypnotized. The film was Niagara. Technically a thriller, but let's be honest. No one remembers who killed whom or why. What they do remember is Marilyn walking away from the camera in that tight dress. And everything, including the Earth's tectonic plates, quietly melting. The scene wasn't even meant to be iconic. The director just wanted a nice little walkthrough. Marilyn enters, walks, exits. Simple. But then, the camera rolls. She takes a step, a second, a third, and the entire crew forgets how to function. Because she wasn't just walking, she was moving like the world was her runway, and everyone else was background noise. The cameraman kept rolling because maybe it'll get even better. The director didn't yell, "Cut," because his mouth had gone dry. The lighting guy, he just forgot he had hands. And so it went, for 35 meters, nearly 30 seconds of screen time where nothing happens, except you fall helplessly in love. And get this, it wasn't an accident. Marilyn trained that walk like a Navy SEAL trains marksmanship. She read books on body movement, visualized imaginary strings pulling her upward, imagined walking like she was suspended from a cloud. Seriously, that kind of walk doesn't come with genetics. It's sculpted. She wore heels, a skin-tight dress, probably a mountain of emotional baggage, but the camera didn't care. The camera saw only magic. No lines, no explanation, just a body moving with the confidence she didn't always feel inside. That scene didn't just make cinema history. It became a masterclass in sexuality without vulgarity, femininity without dialogue, power without effort. While men on screen shouted, fought, and exploded things, Marilyn simply walked and won. So next time someone says, an actress should act, not strut, show them Niagara and tell them to try walking like that. Just warn the camera crew. Drooling is highly likely. 80 takes and not a single. Sorry, how Marilyn Monroe drove a film crew to madness. With a smile, you think being a Hollywood icon is easy? That you just slip into some heels, pout your lips, breathe out a sultry one-liner, and the Oscar comes trotting over like a golden puppy? Ha! Welcome to the set of Some Like It Hot, where Marilyn Monroe forgot the line, "Where's the bourbon?" 80 times in a row. Yes, 80. Not a typo. This was a professionally recorded descent into chaos, starring director Billy Wilder, a very tense crew, and a lonely sandwich no one got to eat because no one got a break. The scene was simple. Marilyn was supposed to open a drawer, glance at the camera with that signature innocent but not look, and ask, "Where's the bourbon?" Theoretically, 5 seconds, 1 take, and everyone goes off to drink some actual bourbon. In reality, Marilyn kept forgetting the word bourbon, or where, or would just stand there staring at the drawer like it was a portal to another dimension. Sometimes she'd remember the line, but forget to open the drawer, or she'd open it, but forget to look at the camera, or she'd look at the camera with a face that said, "I'm thinking about hot dogs." Billy Wilder, a man known for having nerves of steel, was by midday chain-smoking and scribbling notes that probably later became the outline for a book titled How to Not Lose Your Mind, Directing a Blonde. Jack Lemmon fondly recalled that Marilyn was unpredictable but brilliant. Though unpredictable sounded a lot like, "Lord, she's going to kill us all." Between takes, Marilyn would apologize. But her apologies came out so soft and sweet, you couldn't actually be mad. It was like a toddler breaking a vase and then singing "Happy Birthday" as an apology. And you're just like, fine, go ahead, do whatever you want. And you know what? When they finally got the right take, it was perfect, not good enough, not that'll do. It was one of those moments where you realize, this is why we suffered through Bourbon-gate 202 takes, because Marilyn wasn't just an actress, she was an alchemist. She turned chaos into gold. Sure, she forgot her lines, showed up late, wandered off mid-scene, but when the lights hit, she exploded on screen with something no one could bottle, only pray to capture. So yeah, 80 takes sounds like hell, but if you got the shot they got in the end, you'd gladly do 800, and buy a bottle of bourbon while you're at it. She earned it. A sad blonde in a golden wrapper, Marilyn Monroe. Asked for help. Hollywood sent her another contract. Hollywood loves glamour, sparkle, big smiles, and "I'm just so spontaneous" on the red carpet. But depression, insomnia, and chronic loneliness? Not really part of the script, too bad, because Marilyn Monroe lived with all of it. She just kept being told, "Don't be sad, darling. We'll powder you up, and you'll be the most desired woman in the world again." When Marilyn fell into apathy, couldn't get out of bed, bailed on shoots or cancelled interviews, they called it diva behavior. They treated her not with therapy, but with another movie role. No one prescribed rest. They handed her a new contract. At some point, to get any sleep, she started taking pills. Then pills to wake up. Then pills just to survive another day where everyone wanted a piece of her, but no one asked how she was actually doing. That's what living as an image looks like. Sure, she had a personal psychoanalyst, but Hollywood didn't want her emotions, just her body and face. If she cried, it annoyed the lighting guy. If she wouldn't come out of the dressing room, it delayed the shoot. If she said she felt terrible, it was bad vibes on set. Basically, smile and swing your hips, Marilyn. Her depression was like a shadow, always there, but everyone acted like they didn't see it, as if a designer dress made you invincible, as if makeup could hide not just the dark circles under your eyes, but the emptiness inside too. And she asked for help, openly, in interviews, in letters, in her private notebooks. She wrote, "Sometimes I feel I'm just tired of being me. I'm tired of being Marilyn." But no one cared, because the public didn't want Marilyn the human being. The public wanted Marilyn TM the brand, glossy, sexy, flawless. A version they could slap on a poster or screen, without thinking about how much she cried before filming. In the end, the depression didn't go away. It just became part of her image, a secret everyone knew but didn't want to talk about. And maybe, just maybe, if people had treated her like a woman and not an icon, the story would have ended differently. So next time someone says, "What did she have to complain about? She had everything, fame, money, men," ask them why the most desired woman in the world couldn't find one person who would just listen. 36 years old, a million theories, and not a single straight answer. Who really put down Marilyn Monroe? Here's how a regular person dies. The doctor signs the death certificate, loved ones grieve, the local newspaper writes a short paragraph. And here's how Marilyn Monroe dies. Within seconds, it turns into an international detective thriller involving politicians, intelligence agencies, conspiracy theories, empty pill bottles, and of course, a bed without a blanket. Because even in death, she apparently had to look mysteriously sexy. Marilyn died in August 1962, allegedly from a barbiturate overdose. But the key word here is allegedly, because more than 60 years later, humanity is still split into two camps: those who believe it was suicide, and those who are convinced she was silenced for knowing too much. And that's where things get fun. First of all, who actually found the body? Some say it was the housekeeper, others the doctor, and a few even claim the FBI knew before she did. Then, there's the matter of her body being moved before the police arrived. Yep, officially she was found face down, but the report says she was lying on her back, a little corpse magic trick perhaps. Let's talk about the phone calls. Records show Marilyn spoke with Robert Kennedy, yes, the US president's brother, just a day before her death. Rumor has it she threatened to go public with a diary full of nuclear secrets, because apparently having affairs with not one, but two Kennedys is fun, until you realize you've heard way too much. There was no glass of water in the room to wash down all those pills, no injection marks, and the pills were in her stomach, but not in her throat. Convenient, isn't it? As if someone thought, let's make it look like an overdose, kinda. But Hollywood needed a palatable story, sad, tragic, but still on brand. They didn't want murdered Marilyn, they wanted broken Marilyn. So her ending matched the script: lonely, naked, heartbroken, with a bottle of pills as her final accessory. And now, every time you see her on a poster, laughing, waving, selling the fantasy of a woman who lived for pleasure, remember that her death wasn't a finale. It was a mystery no one ever dared to solve. Maybe she really was tired, or maybe someone made sure she stayed silent for good, so she wouldn't talk about who she slept with, what she knew, or why a few powerful men in suits suddenly got very nervous. Which leaves us with the one question that still echoes through time. Did Marilyn die, or was she helped along the way? 36 diamonds and one failed marriage. How Marilyn Monroe wore rings, worth more than most people altogether. When you're Marilyn Monroe, your jewelry has to shine brighter than any Hollywood star. Not because you necessarily love diamonds, though diamonds are a girl's best friend, forever cemented that idea, but because your men are desperately trying to buy your heart, preferably set in platinum and wrapped in baguette-cut sparkle. The first of these romantics, Joe DiMaggio, baseball legend and part-time husband who seemed to believe that a platinum eternity ring could fix marital problems. He gifted Marilyn a stunning band lined with 36 diamonds. Not one, not three, not even 5, 36. One for every hour he spent not understanding why his wife was stripping on camera. The ring looked expensive because it was expensive. In 1999, it went up for auction and fetched a juicy $772,500. That's nearly $1 million for a symbol of how not to manage a marriage between a silent sportsman and the most wanted woman on earth. For the record, their marriage lasted just 274 days. That's about $2,800 per day of wedded bliss. Some people pay that much to rent a penthouse in Manhattan, Marilyn just said. I do. And yet, despite the emotional train wreck, Joe never quite let go. He was the one who sent roses to her grave every week for 20 years. Romantic? Yes. Slightly haunting? Also yes, especially when you remember that during their marriage, he was known for his charming control issues, like telling her she wasn't allowed to leave the house in that dress. Anyway, the ring remained. The husband didn't, and the story, it became immortalized in museums and auction catalogues, because when you're Marilyn, even your heartbreaks are more profitable than other people's careers. Then came Arthur Miller, the brooding intellectual, the Pulitzer-winning playwright, and as it turned out, not exactly the best match for a woman being chased by flashbulbs and headlines. Fun fact, their wedding ring drama was straight out of a romantic comedy. The custom Cartier ring didn't arrive in time, so on the big day, Marilyn had to wear his mother's old wedding band. Yep, instead of Cartier, she got passed down by your mother-in-law. Still, there was something kind of sweet about it. At least in the photos, Marilyn shines as if nothing could ever go wrong, the same way she shone every time she signed a new film deal. And yet, as sentimental as the gesture may have been, let's be honest, not even Arthur's heirloom could withstand the tidal wave of depression, creative frustration, and the slow realization that they were living on entirely different planets. She wanted love and warmth. He wanted silence and his typewriter. Still, these rings remain more than sparkly relics. They are physical manifestations of men trying and failing to understand, conquer, and contain a woman who was never built to be owned. They tried to bury her loneliness in gifts, wrap her pain in diamonds, and cover her soul with carrots. But as time showed, no stone, no matter how rare, could replace real connection. In the end, Marilyn was left not with rings, but with heartache, scribbled notes, and dozens of quotes trying to tell the world that jewelry doesn't fix emptiness. But the world didn't want to hear that. The world just wanted to see the rings. Sold to the highest bidder, the glamorous afterlife of Marilyn Monroe's most expensive things. Marilyn Monroe may have died young, but her stuff? Honey, it's still very much alive, and selling for millions. If you thought your ex took too much in the divorce, wait until you see what people paid for Marilyn's dresses, jewelry, and even her makeup bag with half-used lipstick. Spoiler, these items are worth more than your apartment, your car, and probably your future combined. Let's start with the dress that made America collectively gasp. The Happy Birthday Mr. President gown. You know, the sheer one with 2,500 hand-sewn crystals that looked like she was wearing nothing but sparkle and secrets. She whispered a breathy birthday tune to JFK in it, and the audience practically needed CPR. That dress sold in 2016 for a chill $4.8 million. Who bought it? Ripley's Believe It or Not? Because, of course, they did. It's now preserved like a holy relic, which is ironic, considering how unholy that moment felt for Jackie Kennedy. Next up, the flying skirt dress from The 7-Year Itch. You've seen it, white, pleated, and defying gravity over a subway grate. That one blew up more than just her skirt. It launched her into pop culture immortality. In 2011, it sold for $5.6 million. That's right, for one dress. Half the population can't afford rent, but someone owns a piece of cloth that once flirted with a subway breeze. Feeling poor yet? Don't worry. Her pink satin gown from Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend only cost a modest $370,000, a real bargain if you think about it. It came with matching opera gloves and a whole lot of Please Marry Me energy. That look alone inspired Madonna's entire career, so in a way, worth every penny. But wait, it's not all about dresses. Let's talk furniture. Marilyn owned a white lacquered baby grand piano, a sentimental piece from her childhood that she actually tracked down and repurchased after her mother was institutionalized. It went for a cozy $662,500 at auction, purchased by Mariah Carey. Because if anyone was going to rescue a sad, ghost-filled piano, it was going to be another diva in heels. Still not impressed? Okay, how about her makeup kit? That's right. A little folding vanity case filled with powders, perfume, and lipstick, some of which still had her DNA on it. But also iconic. It sold for $266,500 for a makeup bag with expired blush. Somewhere out there, a man bought that and whispers to it every night. Probably. Oh, and don't forget her bedazzled clip-on earrings, the ones she wore to the Rose Tattoo premiere in 1955. No real diamonds, just rhinestones. But they were on her ears, and that's all it took to make the price tag hit $185,000. Need something more personal? She once owned a tiny clutch purse with lipstick, a comb, and loose change still inside. That little bag, probably worth $25 back then, sold for $187,500 because when you're Marilyn, even your spare dimes are worth diamonds. And of course, we can't skip the house, the Brentwood bungalow where she tragically died. She bought it in 1962 for around $77,000, and now it's a historic landmark worth over $7 million real estate tip. Die famously, and your property value skyrockets. So what's the takeaway here? Marilyn Monroe was the ultimate paradox. In life, she was undervalued, underestimated, and endlessly controlled. In death, she became priceless. Literally. Her things, her legacy, even her sadness, all got neatly packaged, appraised, and auctioned to the highest bidder. It's glamorous. It's sad. It's very Hollywood. She once said, "I don't want to make money, I just want to be wonderful." Well, mission accomplished, darling. You were wonderful, and now your makeup case costs more than a college education. $250,000 makeup bag and a haunted piano. How Marilyn Monroe's things became more valuable than your self-esteem. If someone had told Marilyn Monroe that, decades after her death, her old makeup bag would be worth more than a Manhattan apartment, she probably would have smiled, sighed, and asked, "Was the mascara even open?" But in a world where her clip-on earrings are auctioned for more than a brand-new Tesla, nothing really surprises us anymore. The white piano, an instrument with soul and trauma. Let's start with the white lacquered baby grand piano, which she bought back after her mother was institutionalized. Not because it looked good in her living room, but because it was her last fragile thread to a childhood filled with chaos and loss. The piano had been sold off during one of her mother's many breakdowns, but Marilyn tracked it down, bought it back, and kept it like a sacred relic. Sentimental? Absolutely. But when that piano went under the hammer at Christie's in 1999 and fetched $662,500, it wasn't just a musical instrument anymore. It became a reincarnation of her soul with a few ghost stories thrown in. The buyer? Mariah Carey. Because if anyone could relate to the drama of a diva's inner child, it was another high-heeled songbird with a 5-octave range, a makeup bag. Worth more than your car next, prepare yourself, is the ultimate plot twist. A makeup bag. A small folding vanity case with traces of perfume, lipstick, and eyeshadow. Some probably still carrying her DNA. Gross, but also iconic? This beauty relic sold for a casual $260,500. That's $250,000 for old mascara and expired blush. It wasn't gold-plated, and it wasn't encrusted with jewels. It was just a regular traveling makeup kit. But it had one thing going for it. It belonged to the world's most tragic sex symbol. Apparently, someone out there decided, my kids don't need college. I need Marilyn's blush brush. Fake earrings, real drama. At the 1955 premiere of The Rose Tattoo, Marilyn wore clip-on rhinestone earrings. Not real diamonds, not even gold, just stylish costume jewelry, pure Monroe glam. In 2014, those little baubles sold at Julien's auctions for $185,000. Let's repeat that. Not because they were Cartier, but because they once touched her earlobes. In Marilyn's world, being near her skin multiplies the value exponentially. Makes you wonder, how much could someone get for the pillow she cried on? Or a coffee cup with dried lipstick? A clutch full of pocket change? And priceless nostalgia. Now let's talk about the king of evening accessories, a tiny clutch purse that once held lipstick, a comb, coins, and even cigarettes. This little leather bag, probably worth $25 back in the day, sold for $187,500, because when you're Marilyn, even your pocket change comes with emotional baggage and luxury pricing. That clutch is like a diary with no words. It didn't say who she was with that night, but it knew what she wore, how she smelled, and exactly how many dimes she had in case the evening went sideways. All that remains. In a box, under the hammer, it's strange how much meaning and value everyday objects acquire after a celebrity dies, especially when she leaves young, beautiful, and broken. Her possessions become relics, fetishes, fragments of her pain, glamour, loneliness, and longing, frozen in time and wrapped in velvet auction catalogues. The piano, the makeup bag, the earrings, the clutch. They're more than just stuff. They're touchable attempts to own a piece of legend, a piece of her sadness, or maybe just a little of her eyeliner. Marilyn spent her life trying to be real in a world that only wanted the illusion. Ironically, it's now her inanimate belongings, silent and lifeless, that speak more truth than all the friends, lovers, and directors who claimed to know her. The house she barely lived in, how Marilyn Monroe's final address became an $8 million shrine. In the world of Hollywood stars, a house isn't just a roof over your head, it's a symbol of success, status, and ideally a swimming pool you can drown your loneliness in. For Marilyn Monroe, her first and only truly owned home also became her last. In February 1962, just 6 months before her death, Marilyn bought a modest Spanish-style bungalow in Brentwood at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive. The price? $77,500, which at the time was considered a little steep. But for the most famous woman in the world, it was downright humble, especially when you think about how much she earned, and how much her dresses would later sell for at auction. The irony. This was the first time she actually owned property. Before that, it was all rentals, hotels, apartments, borrowed bedrooms, and temporary stops between films and nervous breakdowns. But here, she finally had arches, hand-painted tiles, lemon trees, a small garden, and a cozy pool. She had a corner where she didn't have to pretend. Rumor has it she personally picked out the bathroom tiles, chose the furniture, and sent postcards to friends saying, "At last, I'm home." As if everything before had been one long lease on someone else's life. But you know this story. Just 6 months later, she was found dead in that very bedroom. Since then, the house has been cloaked in a kind of eerie fame, the kind that could earn it a recurring role in a horror movie. After her death, the house changed hands for practically nothing. In the 1980s, it was selling for around $250,000, but then came what real estate agents call tragic value appreciation. Because this wasn't just a house anymore, it was the address where a legend died. Tourists began flocking there like pilgrims. Neighbors complained about camera flashes, and realtors rubbed their hands with glee. Today, this house with history is officially recognized as a historic cultural monument of Los Angeles. In 2023, developers tried to demolish it to build something modern and glassy, but the internet exploded. You seriously want to tear down Marilyn's house? The result: demolition was banned, and in 2024 it was placed under historic protection. Current value, between $7 and $8 million. To be fair, it's not exactly a mansion. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, around 2,600 square feet. But it's filled with memories and shadows. Some swear you can still feel Marilyn's presence, and the mirrors might hold a little leftover heartbreak. Real estate sites describe it as perfect for lovers of history, privacy, and authentic California charm. But read between the lines, and it's clearly saying, this is where the icon died. Pay up and inhale her ghost. We can laugh at the marketing all we want, but the truth is, even the house she died in continues to generate profit, just not for her. In life, she longed for stability, warmth, and a place of her own. In death, she became a GPS pin for tourists and spiritual realtors. A house as a metaphor for her whole life. The cruelest irony, Marilyn spent her whole life dreaming of a home, and the moment she got it, everything ended. She didn't get the chance to truly live there, but the house stayed, full of shadows, stories, and pieces of her that never made it to tomorrow. And now it belongs to someone with $8 million and the desire to sleep in someone else's tragedy. That house isn't just real estate, it's a stone period at the end of the sentence, Marilyn Monroe, and that's the most haunting irony of all. When the naked truth made her a star, how Marilyn Monroe outsmarted everyone and won. If you had landed in Hollywood in 1952 and wanted to start a career, you'd better have talent, connections, and, most importantly, no nude photos lurking in your past. But Marilyn Monroe chose a different path. She had none of the above, and not only did she get away with it, she turned it into pure gold. Let's get this straight. Yes, she was naked. And yes, it was a calendar. The story began in 1949. At the time, a broke and unknown 22-year-old Norma Jean, not yet Marilyn, agreed to pose completely nude for $50 just to pay her rent. Photographer Tom Kelly knew exactly what he was doing. The poses were glamorous, the lighting was soft, and the red velvet background iconic. It would later give the series its name. Neither of them had any idea that this photo shoot would become the most famous nude spread of the 20th century, let alone that the woman in the photos would one day sing, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," in front of thousands. Hollywood hates the truth, especially when it's naked. By 1952, Marilyn was already gaining popularity. Film roles, that blonde bombshell charm, the unforgettable walk. And then, boom, someone discovered that the nude woman in a popular 1949 men's calendar was her, completely unclothed. No shame, no shadows. Hollywood gasped. Tabloid journalists practically passed out from excitement. In any other case, this would have been career suicide. The studio would have disowned her, fans would have turned on her, and Marilyn would have gone back to bit parts in forgettable flicks. But she made a genius move. Yeah, that's me. So what? Instead of hiding, denying, or crying on camera, Marilyn simply said, "Yes, that's me in the photo. Yes, I was broke, and yes, I'm proud of those pictures." End of story. The scandal fizzled. What remained? Pure public fascination. The studio panicked at first, then realized the scandal was better than any PR campaign. Marilyn became that bold one, fearless, real. And guess what? Her career didn't crash. It skyrocketed, from calendar bombshell to Playboy queen. Oh, and by the way, those same photos? They ended up launching the very first issue of Playboy in 1953. Guess who was on the cover? Guess what photos appeared inside? That legendary red velvet shoot. Hugh Hefner bought the rights for a few $100s and made millions over the decades. The irony, Marilyn never met Hefner, never gave him permission, and didn't even know about the magazine. Her body became a symbol of the sexual revolution without her consent. Well, almost shame, embarrassment. Please. When people today talk about authentic celebrities or owning your narrative, they have no idea that back in 1952, one woman simply stood up and told the world, "Yes, I was broke. Yes, I posed nude, and guess what? It's my body, my choice." Marilyn was ahead of her time. She did what we now call owning your story and reputation management. Back then, it was just bold, scandalous, and revolutionary. The irony is, this very photo shoot, which most would call a dark stain in someone's biography, turned out to be her golden ticket to immortality. Today, the red velvet calendar is a collector's item. The images hang in museums. Feminists quote her line, "Well, at least I didn't pretend." Marilyn proved, sometimes to become a legend, all you need to do is take off your clothes and never apologize. The Wrong Door Raid, when Frank Sinatra and Joe DiMaggio broke into the wrong house. For Marilyn Monroe, Hollywood has seen its fair share of brawls, breakups, and scandals. But the story of a world-famous baseball legend and an iconic crooner breaking into someone's house in search of an ex and getting the address wrong feels more like an episode of a drug-fueled sitcom. And of course, at the center of this absurd chaos was none other than Marilyn Monroe. Scene 1. Broken hearts, broken lamps, and broken logic. The year was 1954. Marilyn had just divorced Joe DiMaggio, the pride of American baseball, a national hero, and a man who absolutely hated the idea that his wife was a sex symbol worshipped by millions. He particularly loathed the now iconic subway grate scene from The 7-Year Itch. According to rumors, after watching the shoot, he stormed home and caused such a scene that neighbors nearly called the cops. A few days later, divorce. But like any emotional Italian with control issues, DiMaggio couldn't just walk away. Enter Mr. Frank Sinatra. Frank and Joe were friends, but more importantly, they were old-school guys who believed that you could win back your ex if you just knocked on the door loud enough, or, kicked it down. For some reason, Joe became convinced that Marilyn was hiding out with a new man in a Hollywood home. So he and Sinatra cooked up what can only be described as a private sting operation, and late one night, they broke into the supposed love nest, ready to bust in on a scandalous affair. Only one problem. Wrong house, gentlemen. They got the address wrong. Yes, they broke into the wrong damn house. Instead of a steamy scene with lovers caught red-handed, they were greeted by a middle-aged woman in hair curlers, quietly watching TV in her bedroom. She screamed in terror. Sinatra banged into the doorframe, and DiMaggio kicked over a floor lamp. The men panicked and ran off into the night, leaving behind a mess and, surprise, a massive lawsuit from the startled homeowner. Tabloids lost their minds. The story was scooped up by Confidential magazine, which already had a PhD in digging up celebrity dirt. Headlines screamed, "DiMaggio and Sinatra in Hollywood break-in." Raiding for Monroe, love, jealousy, and a wrong door. Marilyn, of course, was once again splashed across the front pages, despite the fact that she wasn't even in town at the time. But hey, who cares about facts when you can toss her name next to Sinatra and DiMaggio and sell 100,000 copies? Courtroom drama and moral damage. The woman whose house was raided sued both men, demanding compensation for emotional distress, a broken lamp, and, allegedly, humiliation in front of her cat. Sinatra tried to settle quietly, offering cash and tickets to one of his shows. DiMaggio, ever the stoic, stayed silent. While the legal circus rolled on, Marilyn continued filming, smiled for the cameras, and pretended as if she had no idea who those two late-night vandals even were. What even was that? This scandal is the perfect example of how not to win back your ex, especially if you don't know where she lives, especially if your wingman is Frank Sinatra on a bender, and especially if your ex is Marilyn Monroe, who already has the entire world chasing after her. But from a pop culture perspective, this was art, drama, comedy, cringe, and legal drama, all in one juicy mess. Marilyn didn't even do anything, and yet again, she ended up at the center of a storm stirred up by fragile male egos and a failure to use Google Maps. When love chokes, how Joe DiMaggio tried to turn Marilyn Monroe into a housewife and lost to all of Hollywood. You know the type, men who dream of a beautiful, glamorous, goddess-like wife, until she actually becomes beautiful, glamorous, and goddess-like. Then, suddenly, they want her to stay home, bake pies, and button up. That's exactly what the marriage between Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio was, a gorgeous gift box filled with jealousy, control, and one hell of a fragile ego. A baseball star meets a sex symbol on paper. They looked like a dream couple. He was a baseball legend, a national hero, the definition of masculinity. She was a rising star, the fantasy of millions, with the voice of a kitten and the body of a goddess. America held its breath when they got married in 1954. Newspapers screamed, "The most beautiful woman marries the most famous man." Everyone expected a Hollywood fairy tale, but within weeks, it became clear this was going to be more of a psychological thriller with dramatic overtones than a love story. The main problem? Marilyn had a career. Joe DiMaggio wanted a quiet little wife, and instead he got a blonde hurricane of charisma, magazine covers, and studio contracts. He genuinely believed that Marilyn should quit acting and become a wife at home, wear robes, serve coffee, and stop flashing her legs. But Marilyn, bless her, was not that kind of woman. She acted, studied the craft, built her own brand. And as you can imagine, the more successful she became, the more Joe DiMaggio boiled with rage. The frame that broke the marriage, the breaking point, was that legendary scene from The 7-Year Itch, where Marilyn stands over a subway grate and her skirt flies up. Today, it's a pop culture icon. Back then, it was a personal apocalypse. DiMaggio was actually on set, and according to eyewitnesses, he lost his mind. He watched hundreds of men drooling over his woman, cheering and snapping pictures. That night, they reportedly returned to the hotel, had a screaming match, and there was an alleged instance of domestic violence, later confirmed by friends of the actress. Then came tears, apologies, flowers, and more tears. But the magic was gone. After just 9 months of marriage, divorce, he loved her. But in his own way, worse yet. Even after the divorce, Joe couldn't let go. He followed her, called her, showed up unannounced, begged her to quit acting. He didn't understand that Marilyn never had a choice between being a wife and being a star. She was always a star, and it was the only thing that saved her from total despair. 50s psychology. The man is the boss, the woman's just a trophy. That's how Joe thought, and let's be honest, he wasn't the only one. Society back then had no idea what to do with an ambitious woman. She was either difficult or lost. Marilyn didn't fit into any box. She just wanted to live her own life. And to a lot of men in the 50s, that sounded like full-on rebellion, posthumous regret. Oddly enough, after Marilyn died, Joe DiMaggio sent flowers to her grave, 3 times a week, for 20 years. He never remarried. He once said, "I never stopped loving her." But maybe, just maybe, if he had loved her a little less selfishly and understood who she truly was, they might never have separated in the first place. The moral: if you want to be with a woman who's destined to become a legend, don't try to keep her in a cage, even if it's a golden one, even if you're Joe DiMaggio, because one day she'll lift her skirt over a subway vent and fly off into eternity without you. The Deal with the Agent. How Marilyn Monroe's romance with powerful Johnny Hyde blew up Hollywood. To say that Marilyn Monroe made it through talent and persistence is certainly true, but to ignore Johnny Hyde, the man who basically laid down his career and heart at her feet, is to misunderstand how Hollywood really works. This wasn't a story about love. This was a story about power, age, opportunity, and one refusal that broke a heart, but built a career. Who was Johnny Hyde, and why did he fall for a girl with a mole? Johnny Hyde wasn't just any agent. He was the vice president of the biggest talent agency in Hollywood. William Morris, the kind of guy who turned nobodies into stars. He worked with Rita Hayworth, Bob Hope, and knew every trick, trap, and back door in this glittering, cynical jungle. And then he met Marilyn. No big roles, no name yet, but that charisma, that now famous look, innocence wrapped in sin. He was 53, she was 23, but hey, midlife crises know exactly how to pick their blondes. He left his wife, she left. His marriage proposal, Johnny fell head over heels. He left his wife, handed Marilyn the keys to his world, and according to rumors, even proposed marriage. Marilyn, of course, politely but firmly said no. Why? Because despite the image of a sweet little ditz, Marilyn knew exactly what she was doing. Marrying her much older agent would slap the label, "Slept her way to the top," across her forehead. Forever. She wanted to be an actress, a star. And she wanted the headlines to be about her, not her sugar daddy. Hyde didn't get angry. He got to work. Instead of sulking or manipulating, he said, "Okay, but I still believe in you." And that's when the magic started. He helped her get a chin implant, used his influence to land her roles, arranged photo shoots, closed deals. He literally dragged her by the hand into the studios that used to ignore her. Hyde became for her what Harvey Weinstein would later be for others, except with one key difference. He didn't just want to use her, he wanted to protect her. In his own fatherly old-school way, but still, genuinely. And, of course, it all ended tragically. In 1950, Hyde suddenly died of a heart attack. Rumor has it, while he was finalizing a new deal for Marilyn, his death left behind a broken heart, some societal judgment, and a massive hole in her future plans. Marilyn wept, a lot, but a couple of weeks later she was back on set, and no, that's not cold-blooded, that's Hollywood. You either keep moving, or they replace you. Was it all just manipulation? The gossip hounds whispered. She used him, slept with him, didn't even marry him. Smart little vamp. But if you look a bit closer, the truth isn't so black and white. Yes, she benefited from the connection. Yes, she knew what he felt. But she never pretended. She never lied. She didn't marry him for safety. She didn't string him along. She took the help and made something real out of it. And let's be honest. In a world where actresses were often chewed up and spat out by men in suits, Marilyn got out with her dignity intact and her career launched, which for 1950s Hollywood is practically a feminist victory. Final scene. Johnny Hyde was one of the first men to truly believe in her, not just as a body, but as a potential legend. He saw the glow before the world did. He didn't get the girl, but he helped create the icon. And Marilyn? She moved on. Not out of cruelty, but because she had no other choice. She learned early. In Hollywood, emotion is expensive. Time is ruthless. And the show, it always goes on. Happy Birthday, Mr. President, or How Marilyn Monroe Fell in Love with Democracy and Got Ghosted by the White House. When you've already had romances with a baseball legend, a Hollywood agent, and a studio exec, the next logical step? Obviously sleep with the President of the United States. And for added spice, throw in his brother. Yes, we're talking about Marilyn Monroe, John F. Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy in the wildest love political triangle America never officially acknowledged, but could never shut up about either. First came John. Charisma, power, and that Boston accent. Marilyn and John allegedly met in 1961, somewhere between cocktails and a totally unofficial dinner. Jack was the president, a husband, a father, and according to multiple sources, a legendary womanizer with a libido as famous as his smile. Marilyn, by this time, was no longer just a bombshell. She was a symbol teetering on the edge of burnout, desperate for love, validation, and maybe just someone who'd pick up the phone after 2 a.m. Rumor has it there was chemistry. Rumor has it there were nights, and then nothing. No calls, no dates, just silence. He vanished, the same way the State Department does when you say the word scandal. "Happy birthday, Mr. President," a whisper heard around the world. Then came May 19, 1962, Madison Square Garden, JFK's 45th birthday bash. Out walks Marilyn, wearing a nearly invisible dress sewn with 2,500 crystals and, rumor says, absolutely no underwear. She sings Happy Birthday, slow, breathy, and with a tone that could melt steel beams. That moment became iconic, and possibly her death sentence. After that performance, it was like Marilyn got erased by the White House. JFK ghosted harder than a Tinder match during tax season. Whispers flew. Too dangerous. Too loud. She knows too much. And into this vacuum stepped Bobby Robert Kennedy. Comfort or control, the president's brother, the attorney general, a devoted family man and Catholic poster boy. Some say he became Marilyn's lover after she got the cold shoulder from Jack. Others say he was more of a handler, a damage control agent. Was he truly there for love? Or was he sent to keep tabs on the ticking blonde bombshell who maybe, just maybe, knew national security secrets? Either way, he too vanished shortly before that infamous night in August 1962. Talk about timing, FBI files, bugs, and atomic secrets. This is where the real spy thriller begins. According to declassified files, the FBI was actively monitoring Marilyn. Why? Because she was talking about Cuba, nuclear war, peace deals. And, oh yeah, she'd been intimate with 2 men who had access to all the red buttons. There's a theory that Marilyn planned to call a press conference and tell everything. About the affair, the lies, the secrets. And then she was found dead, supposedly of a barbiturate overdose, several phones beside her bed. No note, official version, tragedy, unofficial one. She knew too much. No investigation has ever officially linked the Kennedys to her death, but in the back rooms of Hollywood and D.C., people whispered, there was a threat, there was a woman, and there was a system that doesn't tolerate unpredictable blondes. The moral, Marilyn wanted love. What she got was a high-voltage scandal. She wanted to be heard, and ended up as a whisper in American legend. And Happy Birthday, Mr. President became the most seductive serenade ever, and maybe the last verse of her life.